But other than that, it's really just a discussion of, you know, your core values, what it means to your business. And actually, and I don't know where the conversation goes because you're a coach, you have probably a better understanding of what core values are. And it'd be interesting to hear your experience and what it means. So, that's where we go. It's just, that exploration. So, I don't know if in the NYU course or your coaching training, how deep you went with core values, but I imagine that
Yeah.
there was some core value development work that you did.
Yeah, if you think about it, that's where everything is rooted, right? That's where the why starts, right? Rooted in your values. So yeah, a lot of the work that I've done in both coaching school and even in NYU, it's always that conversation of values, right? Observing them, seeing how they show up for clients, bringing them up to life for them, right? And then figuring out you know what values are serving you and which ones are not.
Yeah,
So
that's always the good. But did you do or think about this stuff before coaching? Like that's always the interesting thing because I'll be honest with you, I've been coaching for I don't even know 12, 13 years, maybe longer. I don't even know. But I didn't really think about that or do it before coaching, at least not on a sort of real thought basis.
yeah, you know what it is I think it is something that you recognize, especially when you work in like corporate environments. I'll give you an example. I worked in retail for over 20 years. And I think where I see the value shows up, I see them when there's a conflict. Usually you can tell there's a value conflict, right? When there is something that's not happening, I can see that the values come up, right? Even though we might not be calling them values back then, in our role, we can see when there's a disconnect. And I think also in relationships, you can totally tell when two people are not on the same page, right? That there is a disconnect in values. So I think before coaching, that's where I would say that I could have seen it and identified it, but not in the way that you do after you realize how important it is.
Yeah. So did you see that? And like retail is interesting. So I loved retail. I did retail when I was in high school and college. I loved it. Where did you see that coming up for you in retail?
Well, I mean, where I see it in when you're working for an organization and maybe the direction the organization is going, it's not aligned with yourself as a leader, right? And I think we see it a lot through when there's a reorg happening in an organization, right? And maybe you don't agree with the way the selection process has happened and is rolling out. Maybe you're losing people that are key to the organization, and you don't really have a say, or maybe the reasons behind a reorg or a business direction or a business decision. Maybe you see that it's not quite aligned with even the company values. I think you see a lot of companies sometimes make decisions that kind of conflict what
Yeah, it's one
you
thing
set
to
out
have
to
it
do.
written on a wall somewhere, and it's another thing to actually do it.
Yep.
And people will find out pretty quickly if what you say is what you actually do. So that I find very interesting. But like we're both coaches, so I think we're unique that we get to deep dive in this. Where do you see the benefits of this of like core values work to your practice and to your clients?
Yeah. Well, I think when you have to think about values, right? It's in the sense of behavioral change. It is a lot easier for you to set out to do a goal, right? To make positive changes in your life. In order, like if you're doing that from a place of being aware of your values. Because what I see a lot is sometimes a client will come up with a goal, right? And they'll say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. Then you got to go back a little bit and kind of think about where is the motivation coming from, right? Where is that rooted? Is it rooted in an external, extrinsic, right? Or intrinsic, right? Or is it an internal motivation? Is it something that maybe is dictated by society or by their ego, or is it something rooted in something that they really value and they want to do? And that's important because behavioral change is difficult, right? To do the steps, to achieve the goals, to like do everything it takes to start that new behavior. If you're not rooted in a place of like a strong why, right, that is attached and connected to your values, it's not going to be sustainable. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that's where people get into conflict, right? And that's where the trouble begins. And maybe that's why I like doing this podcast, because I think if we talk about it, more people will sort of have that realization.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I don't know if that's sort of making the unconscious conscious. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know that stuff. But what I do know is that when people tend to talk about this, it becomes more real for them.
Yeah. I think it also creates higher self-awareness. When you do that work, right? When you are, prompting a client to go through their values to see what's aligning or not, I think it just allows them to have that aha moment and say, oh, no wonder this relationship didn't work. No wonder I'm not satisfied at work because their values don't match my values, right? So I think that gives you a sense of, a different level of self-awareness that now educates you to say, okay, what do I want to do with this information, right? And I think the thing with values is there are values that are rooted in us from our upbringing, right? And that are going to be things that probably we're not going to let go. However, we have the opportunity to adjust and say, okay, is this my number one value, or should this be taking a step back so I could actually do something that is more aligned with my current situation, right? Because I think your core values are always going to be there, but how important they are in a certain time and place of your life, right? It's going to vary. I'll give you an example. I've always had a high achievement value, right? Like that was something that, and you and I both did open training, right? And achievement was like really high. But I also was diagnosed with cancer back in 2021, right? I'm a breast cancer survivor. I had a very aggressive cancer. And when I reintegrated back into the business, I had to really think about what are my values, right? And is this number one achievement value really serving me right now? I know it's always going to be within me, but I think now my priorities shift, right? Because there was a huge event in my life that is helping me rethink, okay, what is it that I really truly value, right? And that's when I kind of thought about, okay, how am I going to reorganize this to make this more of a priority?
Well, that's very cool, and thank you for sharing that. By the way, and I know that's a lot of times that's very personal, so I appreciate you talking about that. If I may ask, do you feel that your priorities shifted, changed, or was there something, or stayed the same when you were going through the ordeal with cancer? I don't know if ordeal is the right term. I apologize. I don't know, but I guess that experience.
Yeah, no right or wrong. Well, yeah, in the moment you have to make decisions, right, for how you're going to go through your journey, right? And I had to make a lot of tough decisions. I had to give myself time and space. I had to stop my business so that I could allow myself to go through the journey and heal, right? And make the decisions that I had to do to support that healing. I think it became more important after, right? When you're sitting here now as a survivor and you're thinking, okay, we know something happened and something needs to change, but what, right? I need to go back to work, but what does that look like, right? So I think it was more around being conscious, because we're talking about core values. Is this how we're going to behave? Is this how it's going to be important? However, we need to be more conscious as is having this high achieving driver attitude going to serve me, right, in a healing journey and reintegrating back? Or should I be more conscious of things that are important to me that I still come to life, through my journey, like love, like health, like family, right? So those are some things that, what, as I'm doing, because I'm always going to be a go-getter, right? As I'm setting my goals and I'm going to continue to look forward, that becomes a lot more important for me. And then the achievement goes more into the back burner. It's still there, right? But it's more in the back, because at the end of the day, I have to control my stress levels, set boundaries, and I'll do all that good stuff, right? Because you have to put the oxygen mask on you first before you help others. So that's
Yeah.
all that happening for me.
Well, I remember when we were chatting, we talked quite a bit about love, and I don't mean it in like the romantic context. I'm talking about it in the core values framework. So don't everybody get all upset about stuff, but and when you were talking about it, it really sort of was pretty inspiring. So tell me a little bit more about that love sort of core value or that aspect that sort of came about, because I thought that was really cool.
Well, let's see if I can say it the same way. I don't know, but I think for me is as I look at love, it's always been like the prevailing, theme throughout my life, and I think it's more about love for life, right? Love for humanity, love for being alive, love for family, right? For friends, for what you do. And I'm so lucky that I get to do what I love every day. That's like the biggest gift I given myself. And I think it's the force, right, that drives everything. When you think about the work we do as coaches, and what we do is we're spreading love, right? We're giving clients the space and the love that they need, that they might not be getting somewhere else. So I think for me, it's also about love for connection, and also about intention. When you're coming from that place of loving, you're more curious, right? You assume positive intent more often than not. So I think for me, it's always a reminder. I told you I have that ring, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was gonna mention. I thought you had a ring or something.
I saw you have that ring that my daughters gave to me. But I think back about even going through cancer journey. If we go back through that, I'm so grateful that I have done coach training before being diagnosed, because I feel like my level of self-awareness, of consciousness was very different. Because I think it is, when we don't experience and give love is when we're not conscious. And I think that if we focus on helping people raise their consciousness, they get closer and closer to those feelings of love, of acceptance, of gratitude, right? So I think is about, if you think about living a fulfilling life, if you think about feeling love every day, it's all about conscious choice.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. It's I talk about core values, and I'm trying to make connections or trying to understand, or are there connections? And there was a CEO from this company called Finally outside of Philly, Damian Jordan. He talks about that specifically. He talks. It's all about love.
Mhm.
So it's interesting that that comes up for you, especially somebody in your position who is an executive coach who sees a lot. So for that to come up and resonate is very cool.
Yeah.
What was that journey like before to coaching? How did you get to coaching?
Oh, yeah, such a great question. So I spent over 20 years, like I mentioned earlier, working in retail leadership roles. And in 2019, I experienced a transition. For the first time in 20 something years, I was unemployed. And it was a difficult time of my life. But it was the first time that I got to experience coaching, believe it or not. And I always say, if I would have had coaching when I was in retail, I would have ended up being a CEO. Anyway, but I got a career coach, and then I hire a life coach, and I was in this place of reinvention. It was like a place of really understanding. Obviously, I had just lost my job. I've always been a high achiever. My identity was tied to my job, and it was difficult, right? It impacted my confidence, and the stories I was telling about myself, because I didn't have a job, right? So it was very tough. However, through great coaching, I realized that what I loved doing the most was coaching my team. Of course, I was a leader, right? My largest team was 600 people. It was the largest team I ever had. So coaching, training, developing, helping my team excel, like those were the things that I really, at the core, right, loved the most about my retail career. And, in conversations with my coaches, they were like, have you ever thought of being a coach? And I was like, no, I haven't. And then I started exploring it. And that's when I fell in love and decided to go after getting my certifications. And that's started my business. And here we are today.
Well, I know I love your posts on LinkedIn. So if anybody doesn't know Gina, you got to check her on LinkedIn. You great posts. I don't know how you do it, but it's really cool. I enjoy them, and I try to support them as much as I see them if they come through my feed. So
Thank you. You're in there too. So yes.
I
So
poke around a little bit, not as proficient. So like, how did some of this transfer into your coaching style?
yeah, it's so funny because when you first become a coach, I think back of 6 years ago, right? When I first become a coach, I think you start from a place of there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome, right? You feel like you're a new coach. You feel like, oh my goodness, I've only been coaching a couple of months. I don't have experience. And it's not until later that you start realizing, you bring all of you to coaching, right? You might not be giving the client advice, but it is your life experiences, it is your career experiences, right? And your stories that are making you who you are as a coach, right? That are actually enabling you to be more empathetic, to understand your clients better. Like I work with high achievers, and because I've been one, right, I know some of the pain points that they go through, right? I know some of the challenges they face, even beyond the challenges they're sharing with you. So I think that all of your experiences, combine who you become as a coach. They help you become, I would say, even much more proficient in emotional intelligence and adaptability, right? And you're able to be a mentor for your clients in a way, and be an inspiration as well. But at the same time, you're ever call out things that they might not be calling out themselves, right? That might get in their way of their success. So I think, yeah, I think that will be my
No,
answer.
that's cool. No, like you'd mentioned something that I think is pretty interesting, and I enjoy discussing. It's like around that emotional intelligence. I feel like in the last 10 years, emotional intelligence has just taken different connotation. I don't know if you've seen that in your practice and where you work, but from my perspective, it used to be emotional intelligence was not something that was really thought of or discussed. And if it was discussed, it was like you're wearing your heart in your sleeve, you're too emotional, all that kind of stuff. Now that has kind of flipped. And I'm curious on what do you mean by emotional intelligence, and how has that impacted the work that you do with clients?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things here. First of all, there's got to be that distinction, because I think there's a stigma from years before, right? Where if you were too empathetic, you were not holding your team accountable, right? And I think leaders, if we talk in the sense of leadership, I think leaders struggle with finding the balance in between driving an outcome, right? Hitting their results, holding their teams accountable, but also being a servant leader, right? And that's what you see a lot of, like, you almost see like to a fault, you see people that are way overly supportive and then they don't hold their team accountable. Or then you see people that are totally lost, like touch with their teams, right? So there's a lot of extremes. And I think when I think about emotional intelligence and support my clients, I think about creating harmony, right? Because it's about creating harmony. What works for you, for your team, and how are you so in tune that you can adjust, right, your style as you go. And I do a lot of training with leaders, and at the end of the day, emotional intelligence is all about your ability to connect with people, right? To listen, to be open to their ideas, and not just listen out of like, I'm going to listen and then I'm going to tell you what I want to say anyway. Right? It's just or listening to, like, waiting to interrupt, right?
Yeah, that's not active listening.
Not active listening. And I think it's also being accountable for yourself. In order for you to show up with high emotional intelligence, you have to be able to understand when you're wrong and accept it, and be open to share when you made a mistake, right? So I think being humble, being responsible, being accountable, those are all things that are going to help you be, have higher emotional intelligence. But at the end of the day, it's about being attuned with your team, with what they need, and being able to adjust. And again, this becomes really tough. And the main two places where I see this being really a challenge is in driving results in an organization, right? Focusing on the ROI and also holding people accountable while still being empathetic. And I'll give you an example. It's like, a team member coming to you because they have something in their lives that's happening, but yet that continues to be the excuse for underperformance, right? And I think we have to really understand what's performance related and what's personal and make a separation and be able to still have the conversations with the teams and still be able to, in a supportive way, right, have the courage to also give them the feedback they need. And I think crucial conversations is the next part that is important of emotional intelligence, because you can be great at connecting and being empathetic, but if you can't have a crucial conversation with your peer, and I see this a lot in the C-suite, right? I see that a lot where we have teams in an executive team and they have no idea how to give feedback sideways, right? Like across the teams. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, I always find it very telling when you work with senior leaders, and this is the comment that I love, and it comes in various different ways of being said. The bottom line is, fix my team. There's something wrong with my team. And then reality, when you look, 90% of the time, it's not the team that's the issue. And it's like, how do you navigate like that? Then the question becomes, like, as a coach, how do you help bring awareness, right? And then how do you navigate that to get those desired performances, right? So I think that's the interesting challenge as a coach.
Yes, it is. And at the end of the day, it might be it is the team, but it's probably because of the leader, right? So
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
you need a little bit of both. Yeah, and I find that, it's so funny because back in my earlier leadership days, I remember when I had my first 360 and I was gonna die. Oh my goodness, it was a lot of fun, but a lot of awareness. So I always talk about that day because I was that leader. I was that leader that was always focused on driving, driving, driving. And then I wasn't listening to my team and I wasn't open to ideas and people couldn't keep up with me, right? So you have to be willing to be humble, and I think the thing as a coach is if we can get the client to a place to understand why do they need to adjust their leadership, right? Like what's in it for them? Like what's the outcome? When you start tying that together, and we can talk about values, we can talk about, goals and all of that. When you start helping them seeing what's in it for them when they do this work, then they're much more willing, right, to go on the journey of becoming emotional intelligence and elevating, their leadership.
What happens when they're not willing, though? I mean, have you had circumstances, or have you seen where, and we talked about this, like the values being on the wall, and have you seen that where there's been conflict, and what happens, when there is conflict like that? What do you think we should do as coaches?
Yeah, I think it starts
I'm asking because I don't know the answer either. I'm just curious.
And I'll speak from experience, right? Because obviously I only know so much, right? So I would say that one of the challenges is that a lot of times organizations reach out to a coach or an executive coach when a person is in trouble or underperforming, right? And that's the toughest piece, right? When you're being, when a client is asked to, hey, you need to work with this coach, that's probably the toughest because it's, they got to be willing to do the work. And if they're being told to do the work, that's going to make it a lot harder on both, right? On the coach and the person, because then, how do you help someone see something that they can't see?
Yeah, that's so interesting you say that, because I think people don't realize all the work a coach does behind the scenes, right? And I think that's some of the stuff that you're alluding to is it's almost like you got to, investigative and detective is not the right terminology, but I think maybe the right term is research, right?
Yeah.
It's researching, the situation, researching, who the person is, researching the team, what is the culture like of the organization. I think people underestimate the work that a coach has to do on that side. I don't know if you see that, but you know,
No,
that's
you're right. Yeah, you're right. And I think, well, if especially like let's say you're working for, a leader in a high stakes situation, you're probably, you're going to do interviews, right? So I'll do interviews, I'll do assessments, I'll actually do, surveys. So there are all of these components that are taking place, like you said, behind the scene, right? Because our job there is to gather the data, right? And I think the more data you have, going back to your prior question, which is like, how do you work with someone that maybe doesn't want to change? It's like the more data you have that is non-biased, right? Like Hogan assessment, like team surveys, like interviews, the more that you have, the easier it is for you to present that to the leader, right? And to say, here's my offer and here's what I see. And here's, everyone, this is what the perception is, right? And if you have data to back it up, it's a little bit easier. However, that stage, you cannot get to that stage until you have built incredible rapport with your client. You have got to build trust and rapport, no matter what. That's your first job as a coach, right? And as a consultant, by the way. You will not help people, get through whatever mission they're going, whatever goal, if you haven't had the time to develop that strong foundation of trust, of safe space, of communication, that then enables you to come back 3-4 sessions later and say, okay, now I've done all the analysis, I've spoken to your team, I got this, here's what we're seeing, what do you want to do with it, right? Because at that point, it's their choice what they want to tackle, right? I'm not going to tell them what they got to do. And hopefully at that point, we're aligning if all is going well.
But what I love, those two things that you mentioned are like trust and, data, right? Those I think are the two things that at the heart. Yeah, that's right. I was getting excited when you're talking about it, because I'm like, I love that you said that. And it's so true. And again, I think that's part of maybe the misunderstanding of what coaches actually will really do, right? So, they only think of us showing up for a session, doing this, and then that's it. And, but they don't realize that that data is just as important, because we know that a lot of the growth and realizations usually come between sessions, in between sessions. And if you don't do your homework and you don't do your research, that's that can have other implications. And I'm very passionate about the fact of having data, right? Because a lot of times in our profession, I'm sure you've seen this, and I know you've seen this around. Coaches will promise the world, but they don't give any data to understand how that ROI is affected. And I know when we speak, you definitely are on that end, which is totally cool, which is why I love chatting with you. So I'll shut up on my soapbox here.
Thank you, Thomas. And I think you said something important, which is promising, right? And I think at the end of the day, the minute a coach is promising, that's the challenge, right? Because it is the client who's executing the work, right? We're there to hold the space, bring the data, bring the empathy, bring, our curiosity. But if the client is not taking the steps, obviously we can't get to the outcome, right? So it's really, I always promise my clients that I'm going to show up 1,000% for them, right? And that I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be, their thought partner. But at the end of the day, I can't promise outcomes, right? Because they got to take the action.
Yeah, they're the ones. Yeah, exactly. Because I think sometimes they want you to deliver those outcomes, and that's not what a coach does.
And I think that goes back to the beginning of every agreement or engagement, is just being transparent, right? I believe in transparency, and I will tell my clients, hey, I'm direct. And when I see something, I'm going to call it out. Okay. So
I can't imagine you doing that, Gina. No.
Yeah. So, I think you have to establish that, transparency throughout anyway. But I think at the end, the most important thing in everything we're talking about, honing the clients in values, honing them in like the strong why they're doing this, promoting that, the behavioral change that's going to get them there. It's ultimately to empower clients, right? Because I think my job is done as a coach, not when my client achieves a result, but when I can see my client do it over and over again, even beyond our engagement, because they're empowered to create a whole new beginning for themselves.
Yeah, I will ultimately tell clients I'm working my way out of a job. right? So, I'm not here to coach you forever. I'm here to coach you to where you need to be, where you said you wanted to be, and then we move. You want me for something else, or there's something, yeah, that's fine. But I'm not, because there's some coaches who will have clients for years, and that's not coaching. That's something else. In my humble opinion, right? There's nothing wrong with like having clients and having long-term engagements, but having the same client for years and things of that nature, I don't know if that's coaching. Maybe I'm in the minority on that, but I just
I
feel.
think that I think the relationship changes, right? Like I think you get to a place that, and I've seen this in some experienced coaches and master coaches, and I probably have one or two clients. Like at that point, the relationship changes and it maybe becomes more of an advisor and mentorship because you've already developed such a strong relationship. You know the person, you know what they achieve. And I think where I seen these engagements be successful is when they become that, like you said, right? They become something else. Maybe there's a deep connection and then it turns into mentorship or advising.
Yeah, I think for some of my earlier clients, it probably started out coaching some of their senior leaders, but then it moved into more like relationship management. So I don't coach the same people again, but I'm connected to the leaders of the organization, and that's where we have insights. Because to your point earlier, that trust, you establish that trust, and then they know that, listen, you're doing things in their best. And I've turned clients down on work, which is probably the dumbest thing in the world. But if you don't have that trust and that integrity, then you basically have nothing. Because if I sell somebody a program or whatever else, or we go down a certain direction just to get that sale and not really in the best interest of the client, then I'm doing a disservice. And right now, right then and there, I might as well just do something else in my life, because you've lost what that integrity is.
No, integrity is a big thing.
That's a tough part about being a coach, right? It's the integrity versus the profit motive. So
Maybe, yeah. But I think the way I see it is like every time you stay in integrity and also you stay in this place of you're gonna work with the people that you can serve at best, right? So you have to be conscious of that because otherwise it's a whole different energy, and I'm big on energy, and I think that you want to make sure that the whole project aligns from all perspectives, right? From the relationship, from what you need to help deliver, because otherwise it's not successful and you're not going to show up the same as a coach.
I can't recall, when we talked, did you do ELI?
I did.
Oh, no wonder we love talking to each other.
Yeah.
So this, yeah, so
It's that level 6 resonating right here for those of you who know energy leadership.
yeah, I'm like 4-6. I'm Mother Teresa, and then I go to 6. And then I shift to 5. So yeah, I'm all of those levels. I love them. I would be remiss if I didn't ask your opinion, especially with the conference that we went to just recently, which I love, the Coaching and Technology Summit. It's such a wonderful conference. And I think it's like my 4th year. They've only been there for 4 years. I think I missed 1 year because I was at a family event that same time. But I think it's a magical conference, and so much has changed from the first one. I would love to get some of your thoughts around coaching and AI. Do you use it? Do you not use it? What did you come away with from that conference?
Yeah, and that's the NYU Coaching and Technology Summit, and been there 3 times in a row. And I can see, I've seen it grow as well, year after year. And I do use AI, and I always tell my clients, I think that's I just finished developing a talk on this, so it's really cool that you asked me about AI. Because at the end
What's
of
your
the
talk on
day,
this? What's your talk on this? When you're doing a talk on this? Tell me. Like, wait, what
I'll
is
keep
this?
you
What are you holding out on me, Gina?
stay tuned, stay tuned. I'll keep you posted. But yes, I think like everything, we have to embrace change, right? We have to embrace technology. It's here to stay. It is the future. But it reminds me of what we've been talking about, emotional intelligence, right? So it can't come at the cost of losing our humanity, right? And I think that that is
Yeah.
where we are. Like we can, there's a lot of people that are sitting here saying, I don't want to touch it, right? I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to use it. And there's a lot of people that are like gung ho, I'm doing everything with AI, right? My
Yeah.
post,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything. I think that it goes back to the word harmony that keeps coming up, right? You have to know how to utilize it. And yes, I do use AI. I'm also very weary about confidentiality, right? Because as a
Yeah.
coach, you always hold that confidentiality. So where I use it, if I have to create plans for a leader, if I'm doing a workshop, if I'm doing things that I need facilitation, I need to create a presentation. Yeah. Yes, I use it for emails. I use it for social media. So there's a lot of ways that I use it in my practice. But obviously without letting it replace me. And by the way, I created Gina GPT. I do have my
Did
own.
you?
Yeah. And it's all about me and it's learning all about me. So hopefully I can use it one of these days as a coach in between. But it is the empathy, right? The human spirit, which is our essence that we cannot lose. So yes, embrace it. I use it. I recommend people continue to learn because it's the future, but not without letting it substitute you.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to substitute a coach. And there may be this overinflation in terms of what AI will really do. But if you listen to, there was a podcast that Sam Altman was on, and he talked about AI actually doing exactly what a coach does. I'll send you the clip. And when you listen to it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, what is he talking about here? So it's very interesting to see where they're going. But I like to think of it as a tool, an enhancement, like you're talking about. It's enhancing what we do, allowing us to go a little bit deeper. And I talked about this at the conference, and I sent out social media. I got the feeling at that conference when we were there. I was posting about it as I was sitting on my little bench in Washington Square Park, right outside where we were. I talked about that there's this flight to AI, right? Everybody's talking, whatever industry you're in, everybody's talking about the AI. But what I think is happening is that there's going to be a flight to humanity, just like you were saying. So we tend to like go to these very, deep spectrums. We really go one way or the other. And I think we're so far into AI that we're starting to relinquish some of those things that make us human. And we heard a little bit about that at the conference, which was pretty interesting. And now sometimes I actually refer to myself as a human coach. Who'd have done that 5 years ago when you started, Gina? When we started this, did you say, "Hey, I'm your human coach"?
What's so funny? I used to have to explain to people what a coach was. I started, I think it was 6 years ago. And I would say, people would be like, oh, I'm an executive coach. I'm a leadership coach. And they'd be like, what is a coach? And now, now I have to say I'm a human coach. Oh my goodness. But it is, I think you bring a valid point, which is, I think it's almost like we're looking everywhere at how do we use AI everywhere? Because it's literally everywhere, right? For every industry, for every process, for everything. And we're chasing it so fast that I think it's going to hit our reality that it's going to be hard to distinguish what's real, what's not. We're seeing it a lot with those deep fakes and videos
Yeah.
and all that. And by the way, I'm no AI expert, but it's what I'm seeing right now because I do talk to a lot of people and a lot of leaders. And I think we are going to face a reality to say, wait a minute, I need to step back a little bit, right? Like what's happening. So you're right, you're on point.
Well, there's a gentleman who I've talked to a couple times, and we're going to try to touch base after a lot of his capstone projects are over. David Lipsky,
Oh
Lipsky.
yes, Professor Lipsy, yeah.
Yeah, from Samsung. And I actually I ran into him at this last conference, and I was talking to him, and I had my notes, and this was, I think, from the second year, and he had some really interesting points that really piqued my curiosity because of my foreign background. Some of the things that he was talking about were exactly some of the things that I was pretty familiar with. And I told him, I said, "Dave, we have to talk again because he referred to waves.
Mhm.
One, he says, we're like, and this was like 2 years, almost 3 years ago now, he mentioned this. And he talked about this being like a wave one, where everybody's chasing this shiny object, all the sexy.
I
And what he was saying, and what peaked for me, was there's a wave two that nobody's really talking about. And that has to do with the integrity, the ethics, the regulation, all the stuff that's associated with, um, businesses and what's happening. And he was 1,000% right. So I come from the business and the audit world. So when he started saying that, I'm like, yes, that's true. So we're gonna connect and talk a little further about what does that really mean. And the other thing is, I'm starting to have conversations with philosophers, and I'm
Mm.
a historian, like a business historian, because when I talk, have you heard of Marsha Reynolds? She was another coach that I spoke with, and
Yes.
she said, she's like, we've seen this before. Like, she's like, this is not something that we're going through for the first time with technology. So that got me to thinking, like, what is the historical construct of what this means, and how do we use that to our advantage as we plan forward? Because everybody's like, oh, 6 months, you don't know what's happening with AI, and nobody knows. But I think we have some history, and we just have to rediscover it. So I'm going to talk to some philosophers that will have some insights into this. So I think that'll be pretty interesting. Some historians, because there's more context, right? I think everybody now is chasing, the AI. They're trying to get, you've seen it at the conference. All these companies are coming up, but there's other conversations that we're not having, and that I think will dominate some of the discussions in the next 5 years. So
I
anyway, I'm
think so.
talks again.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. I'll stay tuned for the outcome of those conversations, Thomas.
Yeah, I want to hear about this talk and what you're doing, and we should make sure that we touch base in this space, because there's others that I'm talking in this space, and it's important to have consensus, and to talk about these things. So if you're open to it, I would love to continue the dialogue and some of this stuff, and maybe we'll have another one of these, whatever we podcasts, and
I see we have a lot of synergies. This is why it's flowing. I love it, Thomas.
there's a lot of level five in this conversation right here. So Gina, I do want to ask, and I don't want to take up all your time today. You've been very generous, but like, and we didn't even get into some of your journey here, which maybe we can talk about that another time. But your journey is very inspiring, and I'm sure there's a lot of other avenues where that journey has come out. But given those journeys and where you are today, what are some, or who are some of those either heroes that you've had earlier on, or people that you look up to? Some people don't like the term hero, but I'm curious, like, who are those people that inspired you?
That's such a beautiful question. And I'm going to start with my mother. I think she has always been my hero. She continues to be. She was someone that was raising two children on, my sister and I, and on her own. And she was a single mother most of her life. At one point, she was working 3 jobs to be able to pay for my house. I remember she would take, probably pills not to sleep so she can work at night at home. She was a seamstress. So she worked really hard to give the life to me and my sister to do. And she's resilient as heck. She's 82. She has Parkinson's, and she's doing beautifully through the illness. And she continues to be my hero every day. I think we all have different people. I have a lot of people that I follow, that I love, that inspire me. But I think for my whole life, I've always seen her resilience as an anchor in my life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
If there was one or two takeaways that you would like to have somebody take away from this conversation, what would you like them to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think linked to the theme of your podcast, right? Which is, you know, like staying true to your values. I think, if you look at, or even if I speak of myself and some of the work I've done with clients, is every time you're not happy throughout your life, whether it is in a relationship, right? Whether it is in a job, whether it is in how you feel, how you look, it always somehow ties to your values. There's a value that's not being honored, right? There is something that you're not holding true to yourself, right? So I think that having this conversation about values and keeping that in mind and making yourself that priority, right? Setting your boundaries for yourself. I think, no matter the roles that we play in life, it is always important to stay true on who we are, to love ourselves. And by loving ourselves is making sure that we honor those values and we set the right boundaries, right? So I think that that's a big invitation to continue to do this value work, because it's it's important. And it is ultimately how you're able to feel love and fulfillment and curiosity and all of those good things, right? And the other piece is to continue to work in, nurturing your human spirit, your connection, your love, your gratitude, like, all of the things that make you human, because that's what's going to set you apart from a world that's so busy, right? And so noisy. It is your own story, your own humanity that sets you apart from the rest, right? So continue to nurture that.
That's beautiful. And the word love came up several times in that. So there's no surprise there. Gina, I can't thank you enough for doing this. If people wanted to reach out and talk to you a little further or find out a little bit more about what you're doing or even your coaching business, what would be the best and easiest way for people to reach out?
Yeah, well, I'm in LinkedIn. You see me there every day.
Yeah.
Gina Martin. And you can also email me, hello@ginamartin.coach. So reach out. I love to have a chat. I'm super open to connecting. And thank you so much, Thomas, for the honor of having this beautiful conversation.
My pleasure. It really was a joy meeting you at the conference this year, and I hope that this is something that we move forward as we go along our own journeys in this coaching sort of paradigm. So I thank you for your friendship, and I appreciate your time.
Same here. Thank you.